Well, it's a pleasure to welcome back Kristy Grant-Hart, CEO of Spark Compliance Consulting. Kristy, welcome back.
Hi, Richard. Thank you.
Pleasure. And I'd like to now talk about Chapter 10 of your book, How to Have a Wildly Successful Career in Compliance, titled Collaboration is Key, Playing Well with Others.
Indeed.
I love
Yes.
that title.
Thank you.
It's a great chapter, and as I often share with my corporate clients, when risk is not shared among support functions in terms of cross-functional collaboration, a lot of risk can fall between those gaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So when it comes to cross-functional collaboration, you can't be everywhere.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So from your perspective, what are the most important support functions where a compliance leader needs to have a strong level of what I call the 3 C's: cooperation, collaboration, and communication? So maybe you can share in order of importance sort of the support function where you think you're going to get the most return of your time invested.
I think it depends on your company.
Okay.
For sure, because the power structures are different everywhere. But generally speaking, I think legal is got to be
Sure.
key. You know, all those contract negotiations, what they put in the contracts in terms of compliance terms, your supplier codes of conduct, what kind of review are you doing for sanctions, things like that.
Okay.
So legal is critical. Human resources, so critically important. Internal audit can be your best friend.
Okay. Sure.
So I think that, and procurement more and more. So I think that those to me are the absolute key functions. And the better the relationship and the better you have defined your roles, but also written how you're going to work together, that makes so much stronger the risk and compliance function.
Well, that's a great pivot, because when you talk about those lines of cooperation, so Kristy, do you see them as informal, formal, or both? If they don't exist now, how would you advise one to get them started?
Sure. Well, again, it is in your company. Does your company write everything down or not?
Right.
In terms of formality, I'm not sure that it matters if it's formal. What matters is that you agree.
Okay.
Okay? So if you haven't ever done it, then it's very easy to have a turf war about who answers whistleblower hotline complaints.
Sure.
Right? Most whistleblower complaints are about HR issues,
Right.
bullying, smoking in the hall, I hate my manager,
Right.
somebody, stole my candy from the fridge. I mean, that kind of stuff, right? But sometimes they have a fraud element associated. Sometimes that's a code of conduct violation as well as being an HR issue. Well, those lines, they bleed, and you go, what do we do with this? And you go, it's mine. No, talk about it first. And if you've got a turf war going, say to the person, how would you like to work on this? What do you think we could do to make this better? How can we separate what it is we're both working on so things get done to the best of their ability from a compliance and an HR perspective? You need to define what it is you both do before there's a war.
So untangle those potential issues with your peers?
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, do you see it ever having to go up to like a CEO or a division president to help?
Oh man, if you're
Or is
in
that like
real problems,
last
I
resort?
sure hope not. That would be you might need a new job if it's going that badly. But yeah, hopefully you can figure it out together.
So going back to your first book, a lot of this is going to be around the water cooler, as you described.
I think that the water cooler is more about getting the sales team and the marketing team and
Okay.
everybody. I mean, it has this functionality too, but there's more formality. It's
Right.
less just motivation, persuasion, and influence, and more, okay, internal audit, how can we work together to
Right.
make this the most robust function we can? Legal, you and I are on the same team.
Right.
How can we work together? And we don't want to overlap. We don't want to do the same stuff. Right? So how do we use our time and resources most efficiently so that the company is successful?
Very non-confrontational.
Very
Very,
non-confrontational.
how do we do this?
How do we? Yeah. We're all on the same team.
Right.
We want the company to succeed, right? Very few employees I've met don't want the company to succeed, right? We don't want to be out of jobs. We don't want the whole
Sure.
thing to blow up. So if we are all on the same team, then it's our obligation to figure out how that team works. Who's on
Right.
first? Who's on second? Who's on third, right? When you know who's on those bases, it's much easier to execute.
Yeah, and I mean, there are books written about how siloed organizations are underperforming.
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay. Well,
There are also prosecutions. A lot
Exactly.
of those companies, right?
no,
Yeah.
that's really well said. I mean, and is it going to depend on the organization whether or not the outcomes get formalized or not formalized?
It just doesn't really matter. To me, it's whether or not you have agreement on what it is you do and what it is they do.
Okay. Well, one thing I didn't see coming was the potential turf wars with HR that I read about. Because I thought that that was just a natural sort of adjacency of leverage. So can you share why you think there's an inherent turf war there?
Because I own a compliance consulting company and I see it every other day.
Other than that?
Other than that, no, HR, in my experience, either HR or legal tend to be the real pain point.
Okay.
And HR was there first. That's the first thing. HR was there first.
Okay.
Very few companies start with compliance. They start with,
Right.
you hire an HR person before you get big enough to need a compliance
Sure.
team. And there's very strong definitions in the world about what HR does.
Right.
And compliance is a lot more loose, right? What does that mean? Compliance, what does that mean is one of the first questions you have to answer.
Right.
But that's another story. With HR, there is so much overlap, particularly when it comes to things like discipline. A lot of companies,
Okay.
HR does the discipline. Exit interviews, do you get to get that data? Most of the time, HR does the exit interviews. The whistleblower complaints we talked about earlier, they're the ones who are resolving those types of issues. In some companies, including one that we work with, HR is in charge of the code of conduct.
Wow.
So
Okay.
if you have that they have that kind of power and responsibility, that could really quickly lead to a turf war with the new kid on the block saying, no, this is mine. I want
Right.
to do this. No, you don't. I have all the data from the investigations to the year dot. You've been here 3 months. It can be really tricky.
So that's the sort of inherent
Yeah,
potential
there's an
conflicts.
inherent strife, perhaps.
So how have you seen some best practices in untangling that?
It all, to me, comes down to role definition.
Okay.
And if you are in a turf war, genuinely trying to say to the person, look, I want this company to succeed, you want this company to succeed, how do you think we can do that better together? How can we share information? How can we work to make this the best it can be? Or go altruistic and say things like, you seem like you are so busy, and I feel like I could help you with some of that. What can I take off your plate? Like, let's talk about areas where other, compliance companies or companies may have done this in a way that I think can make your job easier.
Right. Well, we've talked about...
Help me help you.
So this is a journey. Have you seen this get successfully resolved?
Yeah, I have. I mean, sometimes you got a really bad egg.
Right.
And they're really hard to deal with. In that case, try to work around them, try to leverage with other... It's always about trying to figure out the best way.
Right.
But very few people are truly bad eggs. So if you can diffuse that ego thing
Right.
that goes on, then you can have a real shot at making it better.
Okay, so it's heading in the right direction.
It depends on your firm, but I hope so.
Okay,
Yeah.
Excellent. Now, internal audit, right? And there's been a lot in our compliance discourse and world about how internal audit can really strengthen a compliance program, especially in remote locales. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Again, are there any pain points or best practices that you've seen?
I love internal audit. I
Yeah.
love them. I think that they are the most important resource that is so undervalued frequently by compliance teams. Most internal auditors, they'll go to your Somalia office for 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
You're probably never going to go, and if you do, it'll be for a day and a half to do
Right.
training. They have a sense of culture, corporate culture, that you aren't going to get by just going in and training for a couple of days, right? They also see all the financials. You're probably not going to ever see that, right? They have the chance to do things that you can't do. So in terms of best practices, one of my favorite that I think isn't used enough is to partner with internal audit and call them before they go to a location.
Okay.
Share information. What have you been investigating there? If you can talk about it. What whistleblower complaints have you heard? What are they concerned about? A lot of internal auditors have been auditors for 10 years. They know the managers there, right? They know the guy they go to beer with whenever they're at that office. So get that knowledge. Get the knowledge when they come back. There's a really interesting white paper done by Ernst & Young a couple of years ago about using internal audit to audit culture. Which I think is crazy.
I remember
because
that paper.
There's no way, no internal auditor. They're way too it's yes or it's no. Don't ask me about gray stuff. But you, compliance, can ask about gray stuff.
Sure.
And that's great information. And of course, there's the things that you can add to the audit scope, right? They're already looking at receipts. Can you look at 2 or 3 of the gifts and hospitality
Sure.
receipts, not just from the perspective of does that reconcile, but also does it match our policy? Was it above or below our threshold? And if it was, can we look to see if it's on the gifts and hospitality register? It's not that hard to add little spot checks that can really change your perception to have someone else seeing what you might not.
And has internal audit sort of embraced this opportunity? Have you seen that it's been an easy transition to ask them for support?
I mean,
on these?
in the companies that I've worked at, I've had very good relationships
Yeah.
with internal audit. And I know that that's not always true for everyone, but if you can do it, man, make them your friends. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen a lot of organizations where there's a dotted line between compliance and internal audit.
Yeah.
But what about, you talked about adding compliance elements to an audit scope. So you mentioned a few. Are there any others? And again, given their current workload, have you seen any resistance? So I'd just like to hear some more about that.
I've seen some people put in looking at customs receipts. I think
Okay.
that's a really universal one. Because brokers
Sure.
frequently are high-risk entities, and that's one where you really do get the miscellaneous fees, the expedited
Right.
fees that aren't expedited fees. Those can be really, really useful for them to look at. They're already looking at things. So what you want to try to do is figure out what they're already doing that maybe you can give them a different spin on it
Sure.
so that it's not them having to do a whole nother section.
Right.
It's what they're looking at anyway, and can you look at it through my lens? And I think
Interesting.
that's the most important way to do
So
it.
it's just a different perspective on the same audit.
work.
Audit activity.
Yeah.
That's neat. Well, as I share, it's one thing to think correctly and try to act correctly. You still have to get the money out of that company.
Exactly, right? It's
And
gotta come
internal
from
auditors
somewhere.
see all of it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Neat. You talk about collaborating as a committee, and I think that's super. And I see a lot of organizations that have started these compliance committees, and also that they have mirror compliance committees in their remote locales and regional offices.
Yep.
So, Kristy, if you had to put a role on each chair in that conference room,
Yeah.
who should show up for that?
Well, your friends, HR, internal audit,
Okay.
somebody from legal, possibly someone from procurement, depending on your business, and somebody in a leadership role. You have to have a leadership
Like
role.
a P&L owner, some
P&L owner,
sales.
CEO, head of your region, head of sales, whoever the highest level manager is that you can get on it. Now, here's the most important thing that people get wrong about compliance committees.
Okay.
They tell them what they've been doing.
Okay.
So it becomes a forum to say, look how great compliance is, and I've got all these policies, and we've done training of everybody. And people just go, why am I here,
Right.
So you have to set up a charter that means the committee does something.
Okay.
So I have 15 minutes with you or half an hour. My job isn't to tell you how great I'm doing. My job is to say, listen, I need you to get everybody in your organization trained in the next 2 weeks. Can you
Okay.
commit to doing that? I want feedback about this section of the code that I'm doing. Do you think it'll work? I need help with this gifts and hospitality thing. Can you reinforce it with your people? Make sure there is an ask.
Okay.
You can train and ask them to learn. That's an ask as well. But if you're not giving them the why, and if you're not giving them a reason to be there, it'll disband. It'll be something people decline all the time. So make it dynamic by making it not about you. It's about them.
And how have you seen that work?
Well, it has to be structured well, and it has to be meaningful. And you can even get feedback from that, right? Ask individuals, what did you think? How can I make it better? What's more dynamic? What do you need to learn? What are you seeing that's a problem? How do I help address it?
So you want people to want to show up at those meetings,
I want people to be excited.
as
about
opposed to
coming
what
the
I call a
compliance
kidney
committee.
stone meeting, which is it's painful while it's happening,
No.
but it will pass.
It's amazing. One of my friends said he was doing one of these meetings and he saw someone reading the back of his watch. How boring does it have to be
You're
to
getting
read the
there.
back of their watch? It's pretty impressive.
Now, isn't the flip side of that is you want to be the type of compliance officer where you're getting invited to sit in on other meetings, business leadership meetings, sales meetings? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Absolutely. But you're more likely to get invited if they already feel like you're giving value.
Right.
So if you're giving value to them at your meeting, you're more likely to get invited to theirs. And here's your ask point again, right? Can I come to your meeting? You know how I did this 5-minute training on the GDPR?
Right.
Can I come to your meeting and share that with your people? Do you think that would be useful? How can I serve them with this? Can you help me make my GDPR 5-minute spiel more applicable to them. So now you're including them in how you're going to get that training done, and you're making it cross-functional in a way that's going to be more meaningful, not only to the people you're training, but also to their leader.
So that's truly a successful organization, right? Where people are saying, you know what, we need your help on this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, but you can position yourself to make it more likely that they invite you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. And again, that's part of this journey and the evolution of the function, isn't it?
Absolutely, 100%.
Well, Kristy, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Now, where is your book available, and where can people get more information on you and your consulting?
Sure. So the book's available on Amazon, hard copy, Kindle. It's in some libraries, believe it or not, the
wonderful.
British Library and some of the other libraries. Or you can get it in any bookstore. Now, a lot of bookstores don't carry compliance books, but you can always get it next day delivery.
Okay.
And I am at www.compliancekristy.com. I do videos and blogs for the compliance profession, and my company is called Spark Compliance Consulting. That's www.sparkcompliance.com.
Terrific. Well, thanks again for your time.
Thank you so
It's great
much.
seeing you again, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Kristy.
Okay.